there's a huge problem with freelancing, which is this race to the bottom of pay. So how have you dealt with that? How have you overcome that, or have you? Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. This is the problem when you look at the moderator. For me, as I mentioned, being mission-driven, that's sort of been the question for me, is how to supplement my income without sacrificing my mission. And Abby had mentioned a group called the Op-Ed Project. I lead faculty fellowships at Columbia and Yale, helping underrepresented faculty members get their voices into the public conversation. And so it's not, again, the most lucrative work, but it is stable and deeply connected to both what I care about and also what I'm good at and don't get to do a lot, which is standing in front of a room and teaching, and then also working one-on-one to edit people. So that's been at least something to help the writing move along.
And it's stable.
Yes.
Yeah, so
it is very stable.
You'll hear folks talk about having an anchor gig of some kind, which is, even if it's just, a couple of $1,000s a week, is coming in, at least, you can eat that week, and it provides some kind of regularity too. Did you?
A couple $1,000s a week.
Well, what? Where do you work? I mean, I sort of want to bring it around to a different question, because there are all these ways of supplementing, right? But the fact is, because I work with so many magazines out there, like, there is this basic problem that rates are not moving up for the actual work that we're doing. So if you were getting paid $1 a word in 1995, you're getting paid $1 a word now, and that's for print. Then came the internet, and everything that everybody was going to write was going to be done in 2 hours, and you're going to get $250 for it, right? So then you're getting a pretty good hourly rate, but it meant that the copy was cheap, right? So now we're all like trying to do serious work, and you write one of those 4,000 word pieces that you've reported, you can't find a home for it, you put it up on some online magazines, they're still modeling it on $250, right? Like, that is not, so like, although I admire how everybody is supplementing and making it work, like, there's this essential problem with the business, which it is, and now that more and more people are getting laid off and there's more and more content that's being put up, like, it's on the backs of everybody who's writing and getting paid 10 cents a word. And that's really, so that's like where I'm at with this, is like, it's great to supplement, but there's something wrong with the whole model.
I think it also throws off the journalism, because if you're working another job half-time, you're not available for sources when they're available. You can't lose yourself in the writing in the same way. You're not as on top of what's happening on your beat. And I have found, as someone who in particular has been doing immersion journalism through a lot of this, that, you miss things and it's hard. And if your full-time job was to do the work would be better.
I have two things on this. One is that I use the money from my previous project to bankroll my next. And that's partially just practicality, because nobody pays on time. So I had to start thinking about myself like a business. What's my runway? What's my R&D? What's my this and that? And I would advise anybody to do the same. The other piece that was new for me, that was really hard, was negotiating. I write about equal pay for a living, right? Like, I write about the Women's World Cup. This is what I do. And yet, when people would give me these low rates, I would almost every time push back. I don't know what happened to me. I got really angry. And I would say, no, you're not paying me that. And then they'd be like, oh, you're right, we're not. And I was like, so wait, what, you just lowballed me to start out? And and one of the things that's fascinating is, for the stuff I do, the longer, investigative, more technical things, someone will say, can you do it for, $1 or whatever? And you're like, no, it's not a priesthood. Like, I don't, it's just not, like, I'm not going to go into debt for you to look good to your boss because you want to win an award or say you did one investigative thing. And then I'll say no. And then 6 months later, they'll come back and say, oh, our army of, no offense, but like our army of like interns couldn't do it. And I'm like, no, because that's something you would teach an intern how to do. Like, that's how the process works. And so I think that it sounds arrogant and selfish to say, like, say no and negotiate pay and stuff, but I realize, like, we're all in this. And so if people who are writing books and doing these things are taking these charity gigs, first of all, it's not sustainable. I don't have a trust fund that's backing me up. I don't have, a Scrooge McDuck pool of money in the back of my apartment, but it also I think it sends editors a sign that there is a breaking point and that we will find, and I've had projects where it's like, I will shop it to 3 or 4 places. I know what it's worth. And it takes a conviction that I think you see more in Silicon Valley than you do in newsrooms. And it can be a bit of a bluff too.
I also want to point out, by the way, that some of the work that we do for not a whole lot of money ends up supporting books. It ends up being, in some ways, yes, there's, the piece of writing might be, very complicated to do, but it ends up being a sort of supporting work for your book. And so even though you might not get paid as much as you might like, it ends up being sort of an opportunity to publicize your book.
And make sure you own the rights.
Pardon?
Make sure you own the rights
Make sure
to
you own
it.
the rights, exactly. Yeah. And it becomes a way of sort of enhancing your book. I mean, we were just talking about how a lot of the skills for writing are completely different from the skills of sort of brand development. And, I used to think of that kind of thing as incredibly vulgar, like a headshot, are you kidding me? But these are things that one sort of has to do, or, develop a sort of presence on Twitter. I remember before my book came out, I just thought, well, I just don't do that. And somebody sat me down and said, you do not have the option of not doing that.
I was just thinking that, so many of us, I think what it requires, whether or not you have to develop a brain like that now. We have to develop, but it also, as somebody who's been freelance my whole life, it has required, to do the stories that I want to do, it's required, you know what, I'm just going to do that. It's required a little ingenuity, and it's a hustle. I think that's what it is a hustle, but you also do have to become a business person. You say, I'm not going to take smaller things that don't pay a lot or are still paying what they paid in 1992, and you're not going to do that anymore. You're going to have to take on something that's bigger, that you don't want to do it. And as Bob had said earlier, that's kind of life. You do jobs sometimes that you don't want to do just to pay the bills. That's the way it goes. And on a lot of levels, I think we had it, or have had it, pretty good. I certainly have. There are stories I don't want to do. I don't do them. And there's something very arrogant about that. And so, I think there's, at least as a full-time freelancer, that is sort of what I've had to do, and now I don't want to do it, which brings me to my next point, which is that I'm homeless at the moment, and it's the greatest thing ever. I rented my apartment in New York City. For real, it's out. It's rented for a whole year, and I've been floating around while I'm writing my book. And it's, I think, the only time in my life that I have a steady income. I know how much I'm getting every month, and it's been great. So
You're a landlord. You moved to real estate.
Basically, I moved to real estate. Yeah, no, but it's but it's a different skill set, but it's supplementing my other one.
Thanks. A quick note on that. Something comes to mind when you were sharing that is, I talk to artists and creators that launch on Patreon, and there's thousands launching every single month. And one of my favorite games to play is okay, what do you hope to earn? Like, what do you think you're going to convert your audience, and what would make you excited? Is it $1,000 a month, $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month? And then I speak with them afterwards, and a pattern that I notice is they say, you know what, Tyler? Actually, I don't even really care what it's going to be. The beauty, and I have a hard time on these panels because I don't want to be too salesy and sell Patreon all that hard. But what they say is the predictability is what matters. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it's $1,000 or $5,000 a month. I just know what I have and what I can spend and not spend. So yeah, as a revenue stream, I'm obviously hot on this membership idea, and I think the predictability for artists and creators is important.
And you're also getting paid directly by the people who are your consumers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're fiercely loyal. Please tell this group about the 1,000 fan model, in case they're unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, just by a show of hands, anyone read Kevin Kelly's essay, 1,000 True Fans? Yeah. Okay. The short of it, Kevin Kelly is a futurist that writes about trends, and he said that if you can get 1,000 people who really believe in you and believe in what you're doing and really like what you're doing, you can turn it into an income. You can turn it into a salary if you can get them to give you $100 per year. And I think Patreon is starting to prove that. These folks, we're talking about the top 1 to 5% of your audience and your followers and converting them. I think most people in this room could get 1,000 people to give a couple bucks a month, and you see it become pretty significant pretty quickly. I have stories for days that I could tell you, probably like 1 or 2 compelling stories a week that come out or that get written to us about whether it's Jeff Gluck leaving USA Today and writing and becoming independent. We were talking about Greg Wyshynski, the hockey writer from Yahoo, now I think just moved over to ESPN, went independent in between and launched a membership on Patreon. Yeah, so 1,000 true fans, we're big believers. It doesn't take much. I have this one story. I went to this one artist who was converting like 10x higher than every other artist on Patreon. His numbers were like through the roof. I was like, well, he doesn't have like that many fans. Like you wouldn't probably even know of this guy. It was like he had a couple thousand followers on Facebook. And I said, sorry, but like 25% of the people who even know who you are becoming a regular paying member. What is it? Like, what is your secret? I've seen this happen 60,000 times and you're the outlier. And he said, Tyler, after every show, I stay and I meet with every single person and I build a relationship. And then after that, I invite them to go out to drinks. I mean, it's like that level of investment in building that relationship. So these people who are paying him, again, a couple thousand people, they are not fans. He's found a way to like turn them into friends. He's built a genuine, actual relationship. And so, yeah, I think a lot about the future of celebrity, and a lot of us want to like go off in our corner and work on an album for a year and then come back and then go back and do the work and then come out. I just don't know. I don't know if that's the future. I tend to think that it's going to be more those folks who really build those genuine relationships and can turn those loyal followers into money.
So here's a great idea. Every time we interview a source, we should ask them to sign up to be Patreon subscribers, right? So the mayor could pay me, the city council, the police chief.
Yeah.
I saw some squirmy faces as you were talking, and that's because this is a real challenge in the world of journalism. We try to keep an arm's length from everybody. Yeah. And here we are now, not only uncomfortably promoting ourselves, but now we're flat out asking for money directly. Do any you guys want to talk about the issues that brings up and your gut reaction to that?
We kind of have a preview of that with books, right? I mean, I joked with my book publisher when my first book came out a couple years ago. I was like, I haven't sold anything since Girl Scout cookies. I don't know how to do this. And so I think we have forms of it. I think my issue is always transparency, right? And I think with freelancing, I still adhere to the Times and the Journal's code of conduct. So things like speaking fees from organizations I cover are off the table. Things like junkets are off the table. And that keeps me eligible for some work, but you probably take a pay cut to do that or to not do that stuff. And so I think transparency is the thing. And I feel really good about our friend who's a writer saying, hey, I started this account for $10 a month. Like, I get that money flow I can follow. I think it's almost worse when you have the opposite, when it's like, so-and-so looks really overdressed, or like so-and-so was mysteriously in Tahiti and then just Instagramming about it. And I don't, I think that this model is so much more upfront, and that at the end of the day is kind of what we're doing.
I want to talk a little bit about fact-checking, just because I write for publications that have fact-checking departments, which is always just wonderful, because even though I do opinion pieces, even if it's a lake or a river, your editor is going to sort of, well, is it really a lake? And they're really going to it's really going to make a difference. The words matter, the facts really matter. And this is one of the challenges when you start to do, it hasn't been for me in the public speaking I do, because I really kind of stick to stuff that I really know. And everything I say is fact-checkable. It's stuff that I've written about. It's stuff that, but I become concerned that as one might start to develop a public, presence, or through a Patreon account. I mean, I've seen some of the people who do YouTube, some of the YouTube people, they're saying stuff that's just flat out wrong. And I think if you do that as a journalist, you lose your credibility immediately. So for me, that would sort of prevent me from becoming one of these people who just gets out there and kind of says whatever's on the top of their head.
Well, I do want to say that I think, what we try to do is to slow down journalism, which is the opposite of what everybody else here is trying to do. So, but it's specifically to that point, which is like, how long can you report it? How much resources. I mean, I might spend $1,000 a piece just getting it fact-checked by a freelancer. We do that for pieces that aren't fact-checked by outlets that have fact-checking departments, specifically for that reason, because, you know, we want to make sure that, like, our product is solid. But it does work against the grain of building, you know, going out there, being spontaneous, building your brand and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's slow journalism, you know, has value. I think one of the things is, like, not every word has the same value. And so if you're doing high value words, like, you have to invest in them. And I think that is what we're trying to do and trying to encourage the industry to recognize, which is that you should pay more for words that are worth more. So.
And I feel like one of the most important choices that I can make right now is to turn down assignments. Either because they're wrong for me, they don't pay well enough, or the hardest thing to figure is this pays decently, but it's a quagmire. I can see this is going to take way longer than it thinks it's going to. You want to talk about assignments that you turned down and you're glad you did, and why?
Are you asking us to, like, name names, or? I turn down stuff mostly because I feel like it's underpaid relative to the reporting. I actually pulled a piece from a magazine. I had already done the reporting, and I knew it was a good story. And when I just started laughing when they were like, "We're going to pay you this much," I was like, "Bah!" Like, you know, would that buy me a stamp? And I took it to another news outlet, and they had the pleasure of reading it somewhere where it didn't. So, like, that's the thing with freelancing, you can be, like, a little bit cunning about, and you can say, "Oh, well, then I'll take it somewhere where," you know. So I do that sometimes, but mostly, I don't know. I feel really good about the work I turned down. And the other big one is, like, murky ethical stuff, where once your freelance people think, like, you know, the devil shows up with his little tail and his horns and is like, "I'll give you a lot of money for a donut." And we've all seen the Simpsons episode, and it's not. I feel really good about turning that stuff down.
I get, and I used to get a lot of the content marketing people, the sponsored content people would call me, or they would write to me, and they'd say, "So, you think you could write for us something and then get it into the New York Times?" I said, "You realize this is unethical?" And they said, "Well, not really." And, you know, and I would say, no, it actually is. I can't take money from you and money, you know. And this is what I'm getting. I mean, this is a lot. This happens a lot from individuals, too. They think that they can pay me off, basically. And I don't know if somebody told them they could, or because this is what it's come to, you know. And a lot of the sponsored content that's out there really freaks me out, because there are a lot of journalists who are writing, who are somehow shoehorning it into mainstream articles, and that is really worrisome to me. And I don't want to use the term fake news, but I just did. So, but that's something, you know, this is something that we have to think about.
Yeah, just to
really.
be clear, you're talking about someone pays you for you to then pitch the New York Times a story, and they believe it's your idea.
They believe it's
in order
my
to product
idea,
place.
and then, I mean, I don't do this. I don't want to. I don't. If we're being taped, I don't do this. But you know, it's no. But what they will do is they will say, "Yeah, my client is so and so is Mizzou, and you've got to get us into a column in the New York Times or wherever." But we'll just say the Times. We're going to pay you to do that, and the story doesn't have to be about us. It's just you just have to mention us. You just have to get our name in there or whatever. So it's like product placement, and they're paying people to do this, and then you get paid from the paper as well. You know, it's terrible. I mean, that is a lot of what happens.
Terrible but tempting when you're underpaid.
No, not tempting. I have to say that's not tempting. A Chanel bag, maybe, but not, you know. Not.
I'd always give the number for the advertising department. Be like, "We would love your money. Call these people. Write a big check. I want nothing to do with it."
Yeah, no, but yeah.
So one thing that I'm thinking about here, you know, I have done some marketing work, and it is well paid, and I think I'm pretty good at it. And I will tell you from a marketing perspective that I'm sitting here thinking about how brand building would be very bad for my brand. So as someone who writes about social issues and gender and inequality, as someone who's writing about homelessness, the creation of myself as a brand right now would be very bad for my brand. Right? The idea of me having a really beautifully well-designed website with really glamorous pictures of me. I mean, you know, I live with a photographer. I have pictures at the ready that can never see the light of day because they're just a little too fab for my brand at the moment. The idea of really sort of writing self-important pieces that maybe pitch me as a voice in a certain way, all of that would be very bad for my brand. And so, which doesn't mean that I should somehow coordinate like a lower rent, different voice version of myself, which is good for writing about poverty, because maybe I'm not going to write about that next. Also, that feels really suspect and gross to me. And so I think that for a lot of journalists, especially those of us who write about serious issues, which frankly I think many journalists get into this business to do, the notion of brand creation is much thornier than we may discuss. It is one thing if you have a business book, and there is nothing wrong with having a business book. Right? There's another thing if you're a style reporter, and there's nothing wrong with being a style reporter. There are, you know, really crucial ideas under both of those fields, both of those topics. But often, if you want to be someone whose work is taken seriously, that is what your brand is. I mean, if you think about the people in the world who have very strong brands around major social issues, they often don't have Atul Gawande's brand, even if he's writing about a serious social issue, right? Katherine Boo is someone you may not have heard of or couldn't pick out of a lineup, but she wrote one of the best-selling books of about poverty in the past 25 years. Her invisibility is part of her brand. And I think that it's really worth, when we're thinking about innovation and marketing and how journalists need to be selling themselves, thinking about how our ideas about selling in the business world are often at very deep odds with what we do as journalists, not just in terms of thinking about marketing versus not marketing, but actually how we market ourselves.
I think that's really well said. And if we have time for one more question here, right? You can continue answering as I'm about to ask this last question. We're sitting here in a room of people who are designing the future of media. And what do you want to tell all of them in this great opportunity about how they can make a world in which we can do the things that we need to do? I mean, that was a great start. We need to think very differently about branding than we do.
$3 a word.
I feel like I've learned more about my day-to-day life as a journalist from my friends who are actors and creative, you know, and kind of more traditionally creative fields than friends of mine who went to college and been in newsrooms for a long time, meaning that they understand what they're doing as an offering. They slog, they audition a lot, they hustle, they handle unpredictability differently. I feel like we should look at some other industries and what they've been doing. I think the biggest things that have happened in our industry have happened outside of newsrooms, not inside. And I would like, for journalism for the next 10 years, I think it was somebody earlier who said we should have some more swagger. I would like us to be leading that instead of it just happening to us.
Tyler?
I think I would just say, I go to these conferences for like podcasters and gamers and musicians, and it's all the same. I have one message, and it's that you're worth it. What you do is so damn important, and people will pay for it. If we make it easy for them to pay for it, they will. So yeah, I would just want to inject that confidence and let you know that you're worth it, you deserve to be paid, and we're going to try to make that easy for you.
We're all Beyonce.
That's what I meant.
I just want to implore people to value expertise and value deep reporting. There's some topics that really can't be grasped unless people really know what they're looking at and have a deeper understanding of the field. And I always think it's quite tragic when you see some of these terrific journalists who've been working on a beat for 20, 30 years or 40 years, all of a sudden, you know, they get canned and replaced with people who are younger and perhaps cheaper. And the reporting really suffers. The reporting really matters.
And I'm going to take off from that, which is, I heard this morning in several different forms, and I hear it at every journalism conference that I go to, The thing that's going to save us is our relationship with our readers. And what makes, I just want to scream it every time I hear it. Your relationship with your readers was with the 50-year-old columnists that you had, was with the people who've been working in that newsroom for 20 and 30 years, who spent years developing that relationship. These things take a long time. Becoming a good reporter takes a long time. I remember thinking when I was 25, I wouldn't be good at this for 10 years. And what we've done in our industry is we're cutting to the bone and we're looking at all of that data. If you want to have a relationship with your readers, let your readers get relationships with a journalist in your newsroom, and that takes time.
Bob, what I wanted to just add to this, I mean, based on this morning, it's really interesting to see product and content become merging with the newsroom. Like, I understand that, like, being a dinosaur is not going to work, and like we've got to go there. We've got to like brand ourselves and all of that. But there is a place that all of us who do traditional journalism exist, where the reader is not central. And that's for good reason. I mean, that's because we are using our editorial judgment or our passions or our skills or whatever. I do not know how to bring those things together, the trends that you all are talking about in business models of journalism and what we've traditionally done. But I do know that it's not like full speed ahead into like, let's just give readers what they want all the time, because that's not how we got to this point. So I guess I wouldn't implore anybody to do anything except think about the value and how it used to be done and try to maintain some of that as we go forward.
One thing. You know, recently, the reality is, at least from what I've seen, is that there's been really terrific journalism. And I think we do have to thank Mr. Trump for that. But I mean that. I actually, I don't know how much money we're going to make, but I feel like there's really been a lot of journalism that's been really terrific and in depth, and that people who do what we do are pushing back against that fake news idea, and people are realizing just how important it is. So actually, in a really weird way, I feel like we're going to be okay. And keep him in office so we can have jobs. No, it's, you know, that people have really started to realize that we are needed. And I think that's really a good thing. So that's my note of hope.
So questions? Yeah, hang on just a second.
Thank you. So thank you. This has actually been really, really interesting. And there's sort of a subtext to a lot of the conversation that I think I picked up on, and I'm not sure we really got there explicitly. And I'll sort of try to state it and then just let you react and see if I'm off base. But it feels like it's limiting that people think of themselves as freelance writers. Like what I do is I write words and I get paid $1 a word, right? Like, and there's an economic problem to that, and it's a difficult model, and you spend time scouting for stories. And I feel like thinking of ourselves as knowledge workers or something like that is a way of expanding our portfolio a little bit. And so it came up in the sense of a story that leads to a book deal, right? Or speaking at an event somewhere. But just, I mean, essentially what I'm saying is you're all really skilled, like communicators, interviewers, probably just learners. Like, you're really good at going and learning a new thing quickly, on demand. And that's something you could teach to other people. You could host a podcast for somebody. You could be a fellow at a foundation that's trying to learn about a new area and report their way into it. I mean, I feel like you're really good at a lot of things that are more than just putting words into a specified length for a specified publication. And I've heard a few examples of that, and I just wonder, do you think about it that way, or in what ways does that not work?
I mean, I think about myself as a company and with multiple revenue streams, and I think about monetizing the same item that I've worked on in multiple places. That's the way to the future. The problem with that, as Sarah has pointed out, is what that means is I am subsidizing journalism with all this other activity, and that works to keep me, you know, a roof over my head. That is not a sustainable model for journalism.
I actually very much think of myself in exactly that way. I haven't heard the term knowledge worker, but I like it. And I think that many of us do. Many of us teach, write books, report shorter form stuff, put in more fellowship applications a year than we wish to admit. However, doing it all as one's own company is time consuming. It's all hustle. And I would say the majority of the time spent then is chasing down those knowledge working opportunities instead of actually doing the knowledge work itself. And those proportions are what I think becomes so difficult, whether we're calling it freelance or not.
Also, a lot of knowledge work doesn't pay well either. I mean, like, compare a tenured professor to, like, any of us who would think about teaching a journalism class as an adjunct. I mean, is it worth a few $1,000s to do a semester's worth of work? No, it definitely is not. Like, I mean, maybe it is because that's how you can patch it together that semester, but there's much knowledge work, or, you know, launching a podcast where it's all outlay of your time in the beginning, like no one's quite investing in you yet or whatever. So I think we're coming out of like a staff reporter model, which is a thing of the past largely, but, you know, the models for the future in terms of where the revenue is for our individual companies is it's pretty thin right now. I mean, it requires huge outlay of energy and time and money in order to like start seeing return on that investment. So
And risk.
Risk.
It's
Yeah.
a
So
lot
I'm
of
not
risk.
right. I mean, and also, I mean, even as a freelancer, like if you pursue a story and it falls apart after, you know, you gain all that knowledge and you do all that, and then it doesn't work in the end, like you don't get paid a dime. Right? You could spend a month and like then it gets killed or someone scoops you or whatever. So like there's huge risk in knowledge work, and I don't think that there's like great structures yet. Maybe like, you know, there's like kind of talent models that would work, but I don't know.
Okay, over here, last question.
Yeah, I've got a question for Tyler. So like with the tremendous majority of content being available for free online, what can Patreon do, or the creators on Patreon do to sort of solve the free rider problem of like 99% of the people are just gonna, you know, enjoy the content without contributing?
Yeah. So on Patreon, the creator chooses how much they want to be paywalled or not. So we actually encourage, you just kind of think of it like a sales funnel. We actually encourage folks to make the content, generally your you know, the actual thing that you're making. I usually recommend that stuff should be free and should go on the largest distribution channel you can find, be it Medium, YouTube, or a publication or anything like that. The majority of folks are using Patreon for the bonus content, the extra thing, the extra episode of the podcast, or the extra words, et cetera, et cetera. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Because you don't want to. You have two goals usually. You want to build an audience and you want to monetize the audience. If you just do the paywall, then you're monetizing the audience, but you're not building your following or brand or getting that audience. So you want to do both at the same time.
Could I just say one more thing? I heard the word agent. And I'm going to give everyone in the room my best free idea, because someone needs to do this. I'm also a musician, so I know a little bit more about how that sort of works. And I'm not good enough to have one, but good musicians have talent agents who do everything from booking gigs to selling T-shirts to figuring out new monetizations. I have a book agent. I have a speaking agent. I kind of do my own side deals. I would love to give someone 10% of my income to figure all this out for me so I could just work. Talent agents for these kind of knowledge workers is going to be a really fun job for someone. So go ahead and do it. Sign me up.